What if I told you the property is not actually the thing you're buying? I know that sounds a little dramatic for a real estate podcast. But if you know me, you know I like to get underneath the deal because the property is the vehicle. The real thing you are buying is time, choice, stability, breathing room. The ability to look at your future and say, we planned for this. And that, my friends, is where the numbers start becoming personal. In the first episode of this series, we learned that the same duplex can look like a problem to one person and a wealth building opportunity to another. That was the investor mindset. In the second episode of this series, we decoded the 8 profit centers, the ways one property can build wealth from multiple directions, potentially all at once. But today, we close the loop with the question that should sit underneath every deal, every spreadsheet, every renovation plan, and every late night search on realtor.ca. What is this all for? Because real estate investing is not about collecting properties like trophies. It's about building a life with more options than the one you have today. And if you do it right, the deal is not the destination. The deal becomes the bridge. Welcome back to Real Estate with Nicole, where we look at property through an investor lens. Not just the pretty kitchen lens, although listen, I appreciate a good kitchen as much as anyone. And if you're investing in Toronto or the greater Toronto area right now, that investor lens matters more than ever. This is a market where buyers have had more choice in some segments. Renters have had more negotiating power in newer condo rentals. And yet, affordability is still a very real pressure point. So the opportunity is not in guessing the headline. The opportunity is understanding the numbers behind the neighborhood, the rental demand, and the long-term plan. If you've been following along, we have been building this step by step. First, we shifted the lens. We stopped asking, do I like this house? And we started asking, what can this asset do for my future? Then we looked at the 8 profit centers: instant equity, leverage, cash flow, mortgage pay down, market appreciation, forced appreciation, tax advantages, and refinancing or reinvestment. Last episode, we used the snowflake as our metaphor. Every investor's wealth is shaped by their own atmospheric history. Basically, their goals, timeline, risk tolerance, capital, family needs, market timing, and the decisions they make along the way. No 2 investors are exactly alike. No 2 portfolios are exactly alike. And that is why real estate investing is never a one-size-fits-all. But here is where we take it one level deeper. A snowflake has structure. Well, a portfolio needs structure too. Otherwise, you are just buying properties and hoping they turn into a plan. And hope is lovely at a birthday party. However, it is less effective as an investment strategy. So today, we're turning the snowflake into a blueprint. We are talking about long-term purpose. the reason behind the strategy. We're going to revisit our duplex and bring back Discount Dan, Renovating Rita, and John and Sarah, and close the story we started together. Because this is something I say to clients all the time, the best deal on paper is only the best deal for you if it fits your life. At the end of the day, your investment strategy should not just answer, can I buy this? It should answer, will this help me become who I am trying to become? All right, let's go back one more time to that slightly neglected duplex. You know, the one by now. The tired kitchen, the chipped front steps, the basement that smells like it's been holding onto a secret since 1987. The railing still wobbles, the porch light still flickers like it's trying to send Morse code, and the wallpaper still committed to being a conversation piece for all the wrong reasons. In that investor mindset episode, that duplex taught us how to think. A consumer walked in and saw repairs, inconvenience, stress. Dan saw instant equity. Rita saw forced appreciation. John and Sarah saw long-term stability. Same property, different lenses. In the episode about the 8 profit centers, that same duplex became our wealth laboratory. We pulled apart the 8 profit centers and saw how one asset could create value through buying well, using leverage responsibly, producing cash flow, paying down debt, appreciating over time, creating value through renovations, using tax strategy properly as applicable, and reinvesting wisely. But now, let's imagine the inspection is done. The financing is arranged. The lawyers have sent their very exciting emails with very unexciting attachments. And our investors are standing at the doorway again, keys in hand. This is the moment where many people think the story ends. They bought the property. Congratulations, roll the credits. But for an investor, this is where the real story begins. Because ownership is not the finish line. Ownership is the responsibility phase. This is where the investor must ask, how does this property serve the plan? Not just this month, not just next year, but over the next 5, 10, 15, or 20 years. Discount Dan may eventually sell and redeploy the capital. Renovating Rita may renovate, refinance, and move into the next project. John and Sarah may hold quietly for decades while tenants help pay down the mortgage. And the asset supports a bigger family vision. The duplex didn't change, but the purpose changed everything. One of the biggest mistakes I see new investors make, and I say this with love because we've all had our tell me everything about this listing moments, is that they start with the property instead of the purpose. They say, should I buy a condo? A duplex? A triplex? Should I renovate? Should I flip? Should I hold? And those are really good questions, eventually. But they are not the first questions. The first question is, what do I need the investment to do for my life? Do you need monthly cash flow because stability matters most right now? Do you want long-term net worth growth because retirement feels closer than it used to? Do you want to create more options for your children? Do you want to leave a legacy? Do you want to build enough passive income to make work optional one day? This is because the right property for one investor can be the completely wrong one for another. A high growth property with weak cash flow may make sense for someone with strong income, a long timeline, and a higher risk tolerance. However, that same property could be stressful for someone who needs monthly stability. A renovation project might be exciting for Rita, but overwhelming for John and Sarah if they are already juggling careers, kids, and a life that does not need one more surprise invoice. And Dan? Dan may love the negotiation, but he still needs to know his exit strategy before he celebrates the discount. So purpose becomes the filter. It helps you say yes to the right deal and no to the shiny objects, the shiny little distractions. And let's be honest, real estate has a lot of shiny distractions. New listings, hot neighborhoods, somebody's cousin's friend who made a fortune doing something very vague and possibly not repeatable. This is where I usually say, let's take the emotion out of the driver's seat and put the numbers back on the table. Purpose keeps you grounded. It reminds you that you are not investing to impress people at brunch. You are investing to support the life that you want. In Toronto, that filter becomes especially important because the market is not one single market. A downtown condo, an East York semi, a Scarborough bungalow with basement suite potential, a Mississauga townhome, and a Durham duplex can all behave differently. Some areas may offer stronger cash flow potential. Some may be more about long-term appreciation. Some may attract tenants because of transit, schools, employment hubs, or affordability compared with the core. So when someone asks, is Toronto a good market? My answer is usually, for what strategy, at what price, with what financing, and for whose life? Now let's spend more time with John and Sarah because they are the emotional heart of this series. And honestly, these are the investors I meet all the time. They're not trying to be real estate celebrities. They're not trying to post dramatic before and after photos every weekend. They're not walking around saying, we are building an empire, while forgetting to return the contractor's call. They are regular people trying to build a more secure future. And that is exactly where a thoughtful strategy can make all the difference. In their early 30s, they looked at the traditional path and felt the quiet pressure so many families feel. Work hard, save what you can, hope the cost of living does not keep outrunning your plan, hope retirement somehow works out, hope your kids will have more options, hope nothing expensive breaks at the worst possible time. That's a lot of hope carrying a very heavy backpack. So they sat down and asked better questions. Not, what is the hottest property right now? But what kind of life are we trying to build? They wanted stability. They wanted options. They wanted a future where money was not the loudest voice in every family decision. Sarah said, I do not want us to feel behind forever. John said, then let's build something that keeps working even when we're busy living. And in a city like Toronto, that conversation is not theoretical. Many families are looking at home prices, rent levels, mortgage payments, commuting patterns, and saying, how do we make this work long term? Some are staying in the rental market longer because ownership affordability is still challenging. Some renters have had more choice recently, especially in newer condo rental supply. But that doesn't erase the bigger picture. Toronto remains a city where housing costs shape life decisions. That is exactly why John and Sarah are still shopping for a property. They are trying to build a strategy that can hold up in a high-cost market. And that last sentence matters because a good long-term investment should not require you to become a full-time firefighter. It should be structured so the property, the financing, the tenants, the cash flow, and the management plan all support the purpose. Not perfectly, because real estate is still real life, and real life occasionally comes with a leaky faucet at 10:47 p.m. But the strategy should be resilient enough that one problem does not collapse the entire plan. For John and Sarah, the duplex became a long-term vehicle. Cash flow gave them breathing room. Mortgage paydown quietly built equity while they were working, parenting, and living. Forced appreciation gave them the possibility of creating value instead of waiting passively. And over time, refinancing or reinvestment could help them decide whether the next step made sense. Notice what happened there. The 8 profit centers did not stay as separate ideas floating around in the podcast episode. They became connected to a family's purpose. And that's when investing gets powerful. Not when you can define the terms. It's when you can use the terms to make better decisions. Now we need to talk about time, because time is one of the most important ingredients in long-term real estate investing, and also one of the most misunderstood. People often think they are waiting until the perfect moment, perfect rate, perfect market, perfect listing, perfect confidence, perfect everything. And listen, I'm all for being prepared, for sure. You will never hear me saying, just wing it and hope for the best. But perfect is not a date on the calendar. It is usually just fear wearing a nicer outfit. That doesn't mean you should rush. It does not mean you should ignore risk. It does not mean every market is the right market or every property is the right property. But it does mean that waiting without a plan does have a cost. In Toronto, we have seen how quickly conditions can shift. More inventory can give buyers negotiating room. Condo rental supply can soften asking rents for a season. And then a tightening pipeline or renewed demand can change the conversation again. Inflation keeps moving, rents keep shifting, construction costs change, interest rates move, life gets more expensive. And if your savings are not growing faster than the cost of your future, the gap can quietly widen. This is why real estate has historically attracted long-term investors. It can offer multiple ways to protect and grow wealth. Rental income, equity growth, mortgage paydown, appreciation, and the ability to improve the asset. But the key word is can. Not guaranteed, not automatic, not magical. The property still has to be chosen carefully, financed responsibly, managed properly, and aligned with your goals. For example, Toronto's condo market can tell one story while low-rise homes tell another. Purpose-built rental supply can ease pressure in one pocket while lower-cost rentals remain tight in another. A buyer may have more negotiating power in a condo-heavy segment, while a well-located small multi-unit property near transit may still attract serious long-term interest. This is why I do not like to make blanket statements like the market is good or the market is bad. The better question is, where is the mismatch between price, demand, value, and long-term use? That's where the strategy lives. Think of inflation like a slow leak in the purchasing power of your money. You may not notice it every day, but over time, it changes what your dollars can do. A strong investment plan is not about outrunning the entire economy with one dramatic move. It's about building assets that have a reasonable chance of growing, producing income, and supporting your future over time. This is where the long game matters. 1 month of mortgage paydown may not look exciting. 1 year of modest cash flow may not feel life-changing. One renovation may feel more dusty than glamorous. But stacked together over years, these decisions can create something meaningful. Wealth often doesn't arrive as a lightning bolt. Sometimes it arrives as a series of disciplined, slightly unglamorous decisions that your future self will be very grateful you made. And here is something I want to say clearly. Long-term investing is not a solo sport. Yes, this is a solo podcast episode, but please do not take that as a sign that you should build your whole portfolio alone at the kitchen table with 3 browser tabs, a calculator, and a very optimistic spreadsheet. We love confidence. We also love qualified professionals. Around here, we are not guessing our way into generational wealth. A strong investor builds a team, a mortgage professional who understands investor financing, a lawyer who understands real estate transaction, a tax professional who can guide structure, deductions, and long-term implications, contractors who can price work realistically, property managers when appropriate, and a real estate agent who is not just opening doors, but helping you evaluate whether the property actually serves the plan. That is what I mean when I say strategic ally. A strategic ally helps you connect the property to the purpose. They help you ask better questions. What's the exit strategy? What's the risk? What assumptions are we making? What happens if rates change? What happens if the renovation costs more? What happens if the tenant turnover is higher than expected? Good investing is not about pretending risk does not exist. It's about seeing risk clearly enough to make calm, informed decisions. Because my goal is never to talk you into a property. My goal is to help you understand whether the property belongs in your plan. So let's bring this series home. The investor mindset was about the lens. The 8 profit centers was about the mechanics. And this episode is about the meaning. And this is the part I really want you to take with you. Real estate is not just about what you can afford to buy. It's about what you are intentionally trying to build. Because when you combine mindset, profit centers, and the long-term purpose, real estate stops being just a transaction. It becomes a blueprint. Discount Dan taught us to buy with discipline. Renovating Rita taught us to create value with vision. John and Sarah taught us that wealth is not always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. It is the tenant paying rent every month. It is the mortgage balance slowly coming down. It is the family conversation that feels less anxious because there is a plan. It is the future version of you who has more choices because today's version of you started asking better questions. Here's my final challenge for the series. Before you look at another listing, write down your long-term purpose. Not the property type, not the purchase price, not the neighborhood. As Simon Sinek says, start with why, your reason. What do you want your life to feel like in 10 or 20 years? What kind of financial pressure do you want to reduce? What options do you want your family to have? What would make the effort, risk, and discipline worth it? Once you know your why, the numbers become more meaningful. The strategy becomes more focused. The team becomes more important. And the next opportunity is no longer just a property. It is a possible step toward the future you are intentionally building. Thank you for joining me in this series, The Real Estate Investor's Blueprint. If the series helped you see real estate differently, share it with someone who is ready to stop reacting like a consumer and to start thinking like an investor. And if you are sitting there thinking, Nicole, I think I need someone to help me make sense of the numbers, that is exactly the conversation I love having. If you are curious about what kind of investment strategy could fit your goals in the Toronto or GTA market, whether that means a condo, a duplex, a basement suite opportunity, or just simply understanding whether the numbers make sense before you move, reach out. Let's look at the neighborhood, the rental reality, the financing, the risk, the opportunity, and most importantly, the purpose behind the plan. Remember, real estate is not about luck. It's about strategy, patience, and disciplined decisions. And when you understand your long-term purpose, your why, you stop seeing properties as isolated purchases and start seeing them as possibilities connected to a bigger life. The future you want may not be built in one dramatic moment. It may begin with the next thoughtful decision you make, the next opportunity you choose to see differently, and the purpose that gives you that choice. I'm Nicole, and this is Real Estate with Nicole. Until next time, keep looking past wallpaper, keep asking better questions, and I'll see you in the next deal.